Hello and welcome to everyone who has joined. We're going to get going in just a minute here. We're just going to wait for a few people to dial in as they come over from other calls and get logged on. But looking forward to kicking off very shortly here. Jake, Mary, good to see you. How are you doing today?
Great.
Well, good to see you.
Very good.
The sun is shining in Boston, the Boston area, so it's good.
Excellent. It's shining in London as well, which is something I don't say too frequently.
Oh, unusual. And you're just coming down off the Jubilee high, right?
That's right. Yes. For the participants online, just curious to hear where you are calling in from. Feel free to pop that into the chat. I'm pretty sure we have a global group calling in, so curious to see where everyone's located. Colorado, Michigan. Ooh, Michigan, that's my home state, so some nice Midwest representation. Seattle, South Africa, all over. Very cool. Kalamazoo, Michigan. Okay, yeah.
I don't know what time it is right now in South Africa. I might have to look at my time zones for that.
I think it's about 7. No, it's a little bit later than that. Yeah, it's 7. It is. Okay.
Oh, wow. Thanks for joining.
Great. And for the people just joining, we're just waiting a moment for folks to get joined in. I see in the chat too, someone said, Michael, where in Michigan are you from? So for the Michiganders on the call, where you look at your map, the hand of Michigan. So I'm from here. I'm right on Lake Huron. So if that means anything to the Michiganders who are dialing in. So good to see people joining in. I see a few more people still dialing in. We're going to give it about 30 more seconds, 45 seconds, just to get everybody on the call. But welcome to everyone who's dialed in. Feel free to let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. Rainy St. Pete. Okay, yeah, usually you get a little bit more sun down there. It's
Looks like a good crowd today. I know we're going to have some great conversation over the chat. We always do. For those of you who've been on these calls with me before, I'm always amazed at what great comments we get and questions, and Michael's going to help us monitor those, right?
Absolutely. And it's about 3 after. So I think it's probably, we've got a good amount of people on the call. So probably a good time to get kicked off. So let's do that now. So first of all, welcome to everybody who's joined. We're excited for today's session. We've got a great agenda for you today. And as you can see from our title slide here, I'm sure you're no stranger to the idea of the convergence of marketing and sales, whether that means breaking down silos, reorgs, or just better transparency between the organizations. Today, we're going to focus and take a look at the role of sales enablement practitioners as a part of that process and what we can do to help enable that. We're going to cover a couple key points. A few that we'll talk about are driving alignment across the revenue team functions. We're going to talk a little bit about lead quality and improving lead quality and sales readiness through feedback systems when we try to bring these groups together. We want to think about how we can put more relevant content into the hands of our sellers. So from marketing, getting the most relevant things into the hands of our sellers. And then finally, mining and curating conversation data that our sales teams are having and creating better messaging intelligence out of that. Today's call, we're going to do a lot through the chat feed. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And I'm sure there's this group is no stranger to sharing their thoughts, ideas, and questions in that chat. So please keep that active. We'll pull out those questions as we see them come in for our guest speakers today as well. And I'm sure there'll be some good conversation around that anyhow. And with no further ado, let's get kicked off. I first want to welcome our guest speakers, Mary Charles and Jake Miller. And Mary and Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourselves now.
Right.
And I do see a question in the chat already. So we're not going to use the Q&A. Just feel free to put those right in chat as well, so so that our presenters and speakers can see everything in there. So, all right, Jake and Mary, now over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll go first. I'm Jake Miller, Senior Product Marketing Manager over here at Allego. Really excited to join today. My background, I started in sales and then went into product marketing, selling a sales enablement platform. And so, sales and marketing alignment, I've worked in both, sides, and I'm just really, really passionate about it and really excited to be here with Mary, who has been my colleague and partner at Allego in driving that. So Mary, if you want to introduce.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I'm Mary Charles. I'm the Senior Director of Sales Enablement at Allego. And I joined Allego almost 4 years ago, and that's when I started working with Jake. I have a sales background originally, and I've been in sales enablement the last, I think it's 17 years. It's a long time, before it was called sales enablement, probably. So I'm excited to do this session with Jake today. He's a great business partner, and I think we've learned a lot over the last 4 years working together and with the sales marketing, sales enablement, that we're going to try to impart some wisdom today and hear what other people have to add to the conversation.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mary. All right, so we'll jump right in here. So this is an opportunity for everybody here. Sales enablement is, like Mary said, it was not that long ago that it wasn't even called sales enablement. And so this is really a profession that is budding and really coming into its own. It's really kind of having a moment. And there's an opportunity now to really be that kind of glue that brings together all the different components on the revenue team, especially given this new environment where so much of our internal process, like our offices, we've gone remote, and then also the sales process has gone remote in a big way. And so that means that salespeople are so much more reliant on content and creating content experiences and different things from marketing more than ever now, in this new environment. And so, sales enablement, I can speak for myself and our marketing team. Mary and her team are really our sort of everything. We can come up with some cool ideas, but when it comes to actually deploying them to the sales team, helping the sales team understand, getting feedback from them, we rely on Mary and team just, so much. And of course, Allego, we sell sales enablement software. So we're kind of a sales company. We've got kind of sales in our DNA. And so even in the marketing team, we've always made it a point to really drive alignment with sales and really be a supporter and a fan of our sellers and the sales team. And Mary and team have been absolutely pivotal in that. So that just kind of wanted to kick off with the little bit of inspiration here. There's just a real opportunity to really have a real seat at the table with the business. So I want to start off with a question, poll question, just to get a feel for everybody in the audience as far as running cross-functional projects. This is one area, right? Just generally for driving alignment. Do you feel like they have clear ownership and accountability? Or is it kind of more blurred lines, or is there no ownership? So I'd love to sort of hear from everybody and get a feel for what you are all up against here.
This is a really good question, and I see what the trend is coming in, but let's see what it ends up at. For those who have clear ownership and accountability, I'm going to guess you're going to be in the minority here on this call, but let's see.
Thinking the same.
Yeah. And Jake, how would you rate us in our org?
I think that we have gotten to a point where it's pretty clear. There's always room for improvement, but that's my take on it. How would you rate us?
Yeah, I would say that we have I'd rate us so high on collaboration that's helped us define the ownership and accountability, and we're not afraid to call it out when there isn't clarity. And that kind of communication and collaboration, it's taken us some time to get there as a team, right? We have some newer players when people change roles. And I think the team we have in place now has been really successful in this.
Yeah, agreed. That's awesome. All right, so it looks like all of the responses are in, I think, at this point. And can everyone see the results? Michael, is that how, can the whole crowd see?
I think we might need to share that. So let me try to end the poll now and see if everybody can see that. I'm going to share results. So now everyone should be able to see it.
Cool. Yep. So as you know, the majority, it's sort of somewhere in the middle, blurred lines of ownership and accountability. And hopefully, you know, today's talk can kind of give you some, you know, actionable tips and things that you can kind of take back into your organization and think about designing the work for your teams to drive more of that kind of more explicit ownership and accountability across the different teams. All right, so I think we can continue on, and I'm going to just close this. All right. So this is the first point, driving alignment across the revenue team functions. You know, like I mentioned, it's more critical than ever because sellers are relying on marketing in such a, you know, even more than ever before. Because of this, you know, virtual environment and relying on content and making sure that the content has become such a bigger part of the buying process now, and you know, buyers want to self-direct. So, you know, driving that alignment across teams is critical. Some of the challenges, you know, lack of shared goals. We see, you know, the sellers have their goals, the marketing team has their goals, and sometimes it can be, you know, you know, the marketing team might be like, well, you know, sales has their number and we have our number, and you know, when you don't have those kind of shared goals, or at least some sort of, you know, KPIs that are shared, it can be a challenge. Also, competing priorities. You know, if the sales team has a certain, you know, if we're trying to go after, you know, the marketing team, we're saying, okay, we want to go after a specific segment that's going to be really strategically important. It's kind of newer. And so maybe the sellers will have a little harder time there because it's new. You know, a lot of times the sellers are thinking, well, I've got my quota to hit, so they may not want to drive to that newer stuff as much. So figuring that out, you know, and then communication and then the accountability piece. Mary, is there anything that you'd kind of weigh in on or kind of double down on here?
I think if you look at all these different things, the communication is going to be the overall communication and collaboration can help address these, and it takes constant effort to do that. So even if you start with shared goals, you still have to be looking at how are we doing towards those working together. But communication, I think, is one of and collaboration is most important.
Yeah, that's true. And we're going to get to a little bit of sort of some tactics of, you know, how you can kind of drive more of that communication and things that you can think about when you're, you know, communicating across teams to your marketers and facilitating, you know, for all the sales enablement folks here, facilitating that kind of communication between marketing and the sales team. So yeah, that's awesome. Communication is key. So, and this is what it is. It's being the bridge, right? That's where it's, you know, sales enablement has such an important role because you can be that kind of connective tissue between all of the different teams. I mean, you've got a better idea of what the sellers are going through than anybody else, than anybody in the marketing team for sure. You've got, you know, and as well, you know, being that kind of bridge between the sellers and even in their managers and leadership. You know, we see, you know, Mary, you're constantly advocating for the sellers and for the, you know, and just making sure that things that we do make sense, right? That it's actually going to be, you know, that it's actually going to land. So can you kind of elaborate on these here?
Yeah, I think so. On the first one, across the different roles, I think in the last year or so, I've become more involved with demand gen and making sure that in particular SDRs, for example, have a good understanding of what it's not just, hey, we're passing you a bunch of leads, but how does enablement help bridge that gap between, hey, we're pushing a lot of leads to you, and then sales leaders are like, hey, we're not seeing the results of this and opportunities, what's going on? And then coming in and say, okay, let's look at it. What are you pushing? Is it the right message? Is it resonating? What is the team doing? Do they need more enablement? That's one example, I think, where alignment is so important. But marketing is complex, right? There's demand gen, there's product marketing like you do, Jake. There's a whole bunch of different pieces in there, just like sales is complex, where we have people who are prospecting, people who are closing business, and then the management team. So really helping bridge that gap through communication and identifying when there are challenges, specifically what those challenges are, talking about that, and then coming up with a solution. That's how I view my role for those bridging that gap.
Yeah, that's key. And it makes me think about, we're going through right now where we're pursuing a new segment in our business. And I mean, you and your team have been absolutely the kind of the centerpiece for all these different efforts, happening. It's, we've got data coming in on that new segment from top of funnel from in our demand gen team. And then we've got on which sub segments within there are kind of showing the most interest inbound. And then we've got our, some of our like real veteran top sellers who are doing their own kind of research on the different accounts and types of accounts within this segment. And, so your team has led this whole kind of process of bringing all of these different disparate pieces together. And it's really been, we've uncovered like, okay, hey, we need to make sure that we're using the data from demand gen and kind of marrying that with the data from the research that our sellers are doing. So yeah, anything kind of come to mind to kind of speak to there?
No, I think it's really listening to both sides. And I was thinking of an example as you were talking, Jake. And I'm going to guess, people can post in the comments, but have you ever had this thing happen where something going into a new segment or a new product, or whatever, you put together this beautiful enablement plan, you deliver it, and then something doesn't happen. They're not selling it or something's wrong. And what happens? Marketing comes and says, they need more training. And the sales leaders say, they need more training. And in fact, it may have nothing to do with that. So that's, again, an example where I found out it was something in our demo that people didn't have what they needed in the demo. It had nothing to do with the training, right? So I'm guessing that a lot of people have had that experience where it's like, all eyes come back to, right? Julie's saying yes. All eyes come back to sales enablement, like, oh, you didn't train them. It's like, so that's where you have to dig in with your marketing partner and with your sales team and say, let's really look at what the challenge is here. What do we need to go back and look at? And it could be the messaging isn't effective. It could be anything, right? So really digging in. And I think that's part of our role.
Yeah, enablement kind of being everybody just can, it's easy to just point to enablement and say, okay, they don't have the training. But to your point, it's like messaging, it could be they don't have the right content pieces, or we're not going after the right persona. And actually some of the stuff that we're going to talk about later in the presentation about messaging intelligence and kind of getting a pulse on how the actual prospects and how the buyers are responding. Because if you hear a message that we've rolled out and in every buy, all the sellers are encountering the same thing, the buyers, it's kind of falling flat. Well, it's hard to, you're not going to say that, oh, it's a training problem, it's an enablement problem. No, the problem is with the message. But like, if you don't have that pulse on what's going on in the conversations, you might not always know that. So that's again, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And Lisa brought that up around measurements and inspecting what you expect are the key to rule out training. And we're going to be talking about some things related to that, about listening calls and some other things. So that's definitely important to establish up front so you can go back.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we will keep moving here. The improving lead quality and sales readiness through feedback. So being that kind of that core sort of shepherd of the feedback between sales and marketing, and being that sort of the arms and legs of the marketing team to help them get things out into the minds of the salespeople. Can you kind of, Mary, run through these challenges and anything that you've seen?
Yeah, so if you have a marketing programs team and they push out a marketing program and let's say it isn't successful, they don't necessarily get feedback from sales, right? If you don't have that, we're going to talk about feedback loop, but they're not getting the feedback on why is this not working. Sellers may not be really well versed in the messaging, right? So that's another challenge. If they're not well versed in the messaging, program's probably not going to work. And then there may be a lack of collaboration between the programs team and the sales team in creating those programs and getting that feedback and input. So those are all challenges that can come about.
Yeah, and it again comes back to communication, and it becomes even more of a challenge, and it becomes even more important to do in this new environment. So I'm excited to kind of talk to some of these
Yeah, and
solutions here.
getting people sales ready, right? That's in this virtual environment, especially, it gets to be challenging.
Right, because we're not one-to-one. We can't meet necessarily all the time. So, and you can't take every, bit of in-person coaching or, stand and deliver training and just put that over video conference, right? That can be a challenge. You've got to start to use technologies more and start to build more process around some of this stuff. So, and that's kind of like what we're getting at here. So, owning the feedback loop, really, really saying, okay, there has to be a robust feedback loop from sales to marketing. If there's not, marketing is just kind of operating in the dark, and it's sort of just like shooting at, just kind of just operating in the dark. So being able so an enablement team has that unique sort of position and is uniquely positioned to be able to drive that. So, sales content analytics and content co-creation. We've got, Mary, on your team, we've got Jessica, who's our sales content manager. And, she's always looking at which content pieces are most effective. Looking at, diving into the analytics, which digital sales rooms that the marketing team is giving to the sellers to use are most effective. Content co-creation too. We've championed an approach, and we do it ourselves as well, where anytime we come out with new content on the marketing team, we always loop in a couple of key sellers to get their input, get their feedback. Before we roll it out to the whole team, we will, and of course, we use our own platform to do this. We'll record it on a video of us speaking to the slides or the brochure or whatever the new content is, the new message, and we'll share it with some folks and just get some of that feedback right within the video, kind of asynchronously, to get folks, to get that buy-in from the sales team. And, Mary and team have been, your team has been critical with this. And then even when we roll out the content, right, we've had some really great examples where, I'm thinking of the one where we did a certification, and then one of our salespeople, Brendan, he did a great sort of take on the message. And we saw that, and this was Mary's team, your team had ran this certification on the new message, and then we saw this one seller's video and like, wow, that's a really great way to articulate it. And so we kind of brought that back in and made that the sort of the talk track for.
That was the best practice. Yeah.
That was the best practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was thinking about some of this, the feedback systems and loops. So there are things that we do right in enablement where there's a lot of great material from marketing that the product market team puts together that our team would use. We ended up reconsidering how we managed our content, and we reorganized it in playbooks. Everybody has a different definition of playbook, but this was the place that we put together the set of curated content, the subset of information that was the best, not everything, but the best that we thought that people were using, and looking at that and then saying, okay, now we're going to put it in this format, in this playbook. So we direct sellers there. Then we went and looked and said, are people going to those playbooks and using that information? And it turned out that was the most used part of all the sales content areas that we had in the system. So we were able to say, hey, what we did worked, people are using them. And then we start to look at the results and start to listen to calls and say, oh yeah, they're delivering that message correctly, right? Or they're able to talk about a particular competitor. So there are ways systematically to do that as well, not just like survey the team, which of course you can do as well, but actually seeing what's happening.
Yeah, and that was one question that came in. It didn't come into the group chat, but just kind of how you identify the right sellers to start that feedback loop, so you're not getting it from one corner of the organization or one corner of marketing even. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. It sounds, you touched on that a little, but yeah. We
usually try to get a mix, right? So we try to get some most experienced top sellers across our various mid-market enterprise, however so a mix of people, and also some newer folks as well, right, Jake? Like people who've been maybe out in the field for just a few months, depending on what your sales model is, but the less tenured as well, because is this too complicated for them? Are they going to understand it? So both ends of the spectrum. I think as sales enablement people, we usually know who our go-to people are, but we also want to make sure we're inclusive on getting different perspectives of people who have different ways of working or different responsibilities. We try to balance that.
Yeah, and I would double click on or double down on the point about bringing in new folks, because it's also a new set of eyes and ears. It's a new, fresh perspective. So that's going to be more similar to what the prospects that they're going to be delivering this message to are going to experience, right? If you've got a new salesperson, veteran salespeople on your team, they know your product really well. They know all the lingo. They know, they're really well versed. A newer person, they might be able to pick up more easily on something that is a little bit inside out, for example, in the messaging. So that's really important.
Yeah, and Julie made a comment that they use a rep council. I have heard people doing that, which is a diverse group and it's not sponsored by sales. If that's agile enough for you and you can move through that process quickly, that's great. One of the things we found is part of the reason we do it asynchronously through these, put out a video, here's the talk track, what do you think? And people can comment, is just getting people together on a schedule is so difficult. And that iterative process we found that it couldn't happen fast enough for us. It would take weeks, right? It's like, oh, we'll give feedback, we'll make changes, we'll give feedback. It just took too long. So, but if that works for you, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and that can work really well we'll do kind of a combination of both, right? For the bigger, like, at the beginning of the year, launch the big new message for the year, whatever it might be. We might do more in-person stuff for that, but then for lots of all the different stuff that's coming out throughout the year, you can't keep, that's where the asynchronous piece comes in, where you can start to really get that feedback going all the time on all the different messaging decks, different things that you're coming out with. That's really cool. That's important. All right. And
I see a couple other questions coming in here. I'm just taking a quick look. If you have any comments on kind of the frequency of checking in on that use of collateral and that sort of thing. Is there any kind of set plan you have for that?
Yeah, Mary, do you want to kind of speak to that?
Yeah, so I have a sales content manager on my team, and she looks at that quarterly. Jake, right? We're doing those quarterly is the frequency, because just based on the amount of our size of our team, what we share, quarterly is a good amount of data. Someone asked what system. We're doing that in a Lego for sales content management. We use our own platform to do that. Some of you may know us, some of you may not know us as a learning platform, but we also have sales content management in our system as well. So we do that right in our own system. Yeah. And then that feedback, right? Jake has insight into that. He and his team can look at reporting on that and see what's being used. And then Nirvana, right, Jake, is connected to deals. What influence deals, right? That's something new for us as well. So it's exciting. We're excited to see that data.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yep. And it's, the enablement team is just, I can't stress it enough. The enablement team is really the sanity check for us in marketing. Because we're looking at, like Mary said, we're looking at the data quarterly. We look at it too, but it's getting that perspective from the sales content manager. She is with the sellers every day, and in the system every day, and really thinking strategically about how we present the content, how we organize it, how are we serving it up. So yeah, I can't stress it enough. Yeah, that's where the collaboration becomes such a key piece.
Yeah, there was a couple other questions. These are great questions. So we're gonna go with the questions, because that's always the best part of these calls.
Definitely.
As you roll out new products and offerings, how early in the process does sales enablement get involved? Do you wait until it's all flushed out and a go live date is set, or are you involved from the beginning? We have what is called product readiness. Am I saying the right name? Sorry, Jake, I just drawn a blank.
We have release readiness. Yeah.
Release readiness. Thank you. We have a release readiness, which is release of product cycle that we go through, and sales enablement is involved in that, either myself or the other woman on my team through that process. Not so much, we're involved in giving input into how the product's development, because we're sales enablement, and guess what? We have a sales enablement product we're selling. So it's slightly different, but I wouldn't, at other roles that I've been in, I wouldn't have been involved in like how the product gets developed as much as once it's like, here's what's been decided, we're ready to go. Then going through like as many weeks ahead of time as possible to know when is the release date plan, what are we going to do, and then thinking about not just the training that has to happen, but what are those just-in-time resources we're going to need. So I think that's important for people to think about. And someone asked about just in time, and I answered that on the chat. But thinking about what is, when the rep is, or the SDR is out in the field doing the job, and there's something new, where are they going to go for resource? What's the resource going to be? What's the best curated content we're going to need for that? And then build the training from there as well. Right?
Yeah, I mean, from my view, your team has been critical in the release process. I mean, anytime we're going to come out with something new, product marketing, we're working with product team, and we probably get the, besides the product team, we probably get the longest view on, what's coming and how are we going to, plan around it and message it. But, the first thing we do is checking in with you and Jess, Mary. It's just like, how do we make sure that this is going to be, should we do a live training for this? Should we do or should it just be a, it's like a course, or, putting out a quick video? Should we certify them on it? How should we think about, and does this messaging, even checking in on the messaging, does this feel like something that's going to be, usable out in the field? So, being involved, I would encourage everybody on the call, get yourself as involved in the release process and as early as possible.
So there are a couple of comments on here that I have to respond to, because this is painful, right? So a couple of people have commented they're the only learning and development person or the only enablement person for a large group, and they have to do compliance and soft skills and sales learning. We should set up time separately to talk about how can you build a business case for resources, and we're going to talk about a little bit about doing more with less, but how can you make a business case for technology to help support you? And then of course, prioritization is always the key.
Yeah. Trying to automate and scale is key.
But we have somebody who has a team of 9 for 200 salespeople. Julie, you're like in the most desirable spot, I think.
That's
I don't
awesome.
know anybody else has that many, so that's great.
That's dedication to enablement on the company's part. So that's great.
And it sounds like Krista's building, and maybe she's hiring. You never know. You might find somebody from this webinar, Krista.
Yeah. Nice.
Thanks for all the comments. This is very great. Really, really good.
Awesome. All right. So we will keep going. So actually, Mary, I'll have you take this one, if that's okay. Speak to kind of some of the content challenges and getting them in the hands of the sellers.
Yeah. So the two sides here are sales team says, I need more content. I need this very specific thing. I don't have the content I need. I can't find this content. I don't know what's going on, right? So that's the one side. Sales doesn't have what they need. They want Jake to create more stuff, right? And then the marketing, product marketing, 70% of their stuff doesn't get used according to statistics. And why, right? So it's like, I've created all this stuff already. Why aren't they using it? And it was interesting because Jake and I ran into this problem right when I started, before we had our own tool for sales content management. But Jake said, I have all this great stuff. I don't think people are using it. And it turned out, I said, well, how do they know it exists? Let's start there. So we're going to talk about how we solve that problem, but that working in silos where it's like, I'm pushing out all this content, sales is like, I want this content. They can't find it. They don't know how to use it if they do find it. And there's just too much content. So that's kind of the environment. So Jake and I can talk a little bit about a couple of things we've done to help with that. But those are the challenges that we've seen.
Yeah. And that, for some, I consider myself kind of like a really sales focused marketer. I mean, I worked in sales, but even for me, it's like, I always, Mary, I always ask you, like, how should we roll this out to them? Like, what should we think about? And the point, one of the ones that you were getting at with the challenge that we had around getting the sales team to know about and be aware of and understand how to use the content. We were talking about that, and Mary came up with this idea of, hey, do a weekly or a bi-weekly video update to the sales team. And hey, you could call it Jake's Take. And so we're like, oh yeah, that would be pretty cool, Jake's Take. And so, and then we're like, yeah, maybe we could even like make it fun and like take something from somebody's desk every week. And so we started doing this thing, Jake's Take, and we just had our 100th episode of it. And it was, we wouldn't have ever done that in marketing if it hadn't been for Mary coming up with the idea. Like, look, I think this is something that they will, it won't be too much for them. They will, they'll use it. They'll like it. And so it was a really cool story. And we ended up, having a ton of success with it.
And you have to have a catchy name. And it was a good thing that Jake's name was Jake, because Jake's take, right? And even our CEO watches it, he comments on it. Like, it's a thing, you know, in sales enablement, when you create something with a catchy name and it happens on a regular cadence, people start to expect it. And then Jake had a new baby, so then he was out for a little bit, like, oh my gosh, there's no Jake's take, what's happening, right? So people come to expect it. So if you can come up with something like that to promote, help marketing, product marketing in particular, promote what all the great work they're doing and get that out to the field, then the field, and in this case, the field has a chance, then they can go in the video and post comments and say, oh, this is really good, or oh, I didn't know I needed that, or they might follow up directly with Jake and say, hey, can you tell me more about this thing? How would you use this? Who is this good for? So we try to promote it in a way that makes sense, but encourage our team to ask for help or comments or input into that as well.
Mary and Jake, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, no, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to interject with a question that I think relates to this conversation a little bit, thinking about how that content looks from the sales side and the marketing side. And the question was the difference between sales objectives and marketing objectives, and how sales enablement kind of measures its own success, taking those two different objectives, keeping those two different objectives in mind. And I think it comes down to this conversation a little bit, because it might be the objectives around that content as well. What are they trying to accomplish with that content, and how does that tie to their overall objectives? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, from a product marketing perspective, we've got our objectives around, driving awareness for the different products that we're kind of, we've got, driving sales of products. But one of the big goals that we set is a happy, satisfied sales team. Like that, we look at, when you make because the sales team is the customer of the marketing team. So when you make that a stated goal, that that they are satisfied, they feel like they've got the resources they need, they feel like they're able to, the marketing team is helping them see around corners, so to speak, in the market. That really, really helps. I don't know, any other kind of stuff that you might think of with that, Mary?
Yeah, I think the other thing that Jake does well is a monthly call that anybody from sales can call into, where people have a voice to talk about what they need. But specifically on I'm just looking at the question online right now. Taking concerns, different focuses, difference between sales and marketing. So that's a tricky question. I'm just trying to think of an example of that. Yeah, sales has to hit a number, right? That's what we have to do. We have to have a pipeline built and we have to close business. That's what we're measured on primarily. For marketing, I think it's more clear around marketing programs, right? So they're running programs, and is our team then converting those? And the success of those does in part rely on sales enablement, as far as bridging that gap, doing the training that they need, making sure there's this feedback loop. That's exactly what we're talking about. So ultimately, the metrics are still the same. It's more around how smoothly that process goes and how are we iterating and those kind of things. I don't know if that is helpful or not, but.
Yeah, I think so, because it's you made a really good point that the end goal for sales is always to close that deal, right? And then marketing needs to almost tee it up and get them to a point maybe earlier in the pipeline, at the top of the pipeline, to help put them in a position to do that. And I think a lot of this conversation has been around, how, and we even talked about earlier, how do we create that feedback loop so those objectives maybe start to sync a little bit more? Because I'm sure we've all been in that situation where you go, ooh, I don't see how these quite sync up. So maybe that's a part of our role as well, helping bridge some of those gaps.
Yeah, and especially when you think about, if there are lots of leads generated, lots of awareness built, but those don't translate into opportunities, we look at all that data together, sales enablement and marketing. We look at that data together and we say, okay, what's the challenge here? Why are we not seeing the results we expected? Is it in fact training? Is it in fact the program? Let's go listen to some calls. That's the gold, because then you say, oh yeah, you know what? They're not quite delivering the message that we expected them to. We got to go back and do some messaging training. Or that content that you're pushing out to, nobody's opening those. This isn't good content, right? So you got to have that kind of relationship where you're communicating constantly about that. We just had that this morning. I just did a meeting like that this morning.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, Mary, with the like prioritizing what stuff we build, this made me think of the question. Made me think of, you know, we recently rolling out some new products, and we were trying to, as a product marketing team, think about, okay, what, you know, where do we prioritize building, you know, a lot of new assets for the team, because you've only got so many resources to create new content, messaging guides, whatever. And so we talked to your team to figure out what are the marching orders for sales, as far as like what percentage of their time are they going to go to after this persona? What percentage of their time are they going to be going after this? And so then we were able to kind of guide our priorities on content creation and messaging based on that. So
yeah, and I would say a lot that stuff happens at our level, at the director manager level, as opposed to always our CRO and our CMO, right? So
yes,
it depends on how your organization operates, but we, you know, the actual execution relies on us. So we have to help, we work together to figure that out.
yeah, that's great. And we'll see about for my the Jake's take example. My I've got another little one coming, and we've got another guy on our team. His name is Jake, so maybe he'll take over the Jake's take while I'm gone.
Perfect. I hadn't even thought of that.
Our company's bigger now, so we've got a longer paternity leave. So
And more Jakes.
And more
No, as you
Jakes,
say,
you know?
had to hire very specifically. It had to be a Jake's to
Jake,
pick
yeah.
up
Right,
where you
yeah.
left off. Yeah.
Yeah, they call us Jake and Jake on the product marketing team. Okay, all right. So I'll keep going here. So this next one is actually, Mary, if I could, you know, this has been one that we were mining conversations even before we, you know, at the Allego, we've got a conversation intelligence technology in our platform that we of course use. But even before that, before we used that, even in years past, before we had that in our platform that we used, we were doing this just sort of manually. So can you kind of speak to some of the challenges here, Mary?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is you want to hear calls, right? So one is there are so many calls to listen to, figuring out what calls do I listen to and where do I find the time to do that. So that's one of the challenges, because you want to hear both the sales side wants to hear, I want to hear sales enablement. How are my sellers doing, right? I've taught them to do something, or they've learned to do something. Are they actually doing that? Do they have the right behaviors? Are they having the right conversations and messaging? But then on the other side, it's like, Jake wants to know, hey, we developed this messaging. How's that going over? What's the voice of the customer? What are they saying? What's the reaction? Not just is sales delivering correctly, but what feedback are you hearing? So figuring out which calls do we listen to best find that, and figuring out what's resonating with buyers. There is, we wanted to be really like open about this, is that there is a potential in some organizations that they don't want to do recordings, so that they might not have the technology to do analysis of those to make it useful. If you're just recording in Zoom and you have a whole bunch of Zoom calls, it's very challenging if you don't have a technology to help kind of figure out where to go with that. And there are some industries where you just can't record. Right? That happens in some places. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing.
Yeah, great. And, you know, as far as this kind of, you know, thinking about the technology perspective of, you know, being able to sort of start to automate some of these processes, you've probably all heard of conversation intelligence technology, maybe many of you using it, but really being able to sort of kind of scale this whole process. We started out, you know, years ago when Mary first joined, and where we were, you know, going through and sort of, we would actually manually record calls and then take, you know, MP4s from Zooms, load them into our platform, and we would, and Mary would, you know, her team would be sharing stuff with our team. Okay, we're just rolling out into this new market space here, and can, you know, so can you kind of, you know, mine the team for calls, or ask, you know, kind of continuously kind of, you know, stay on them to share, you know, examples of how messaging is resonating and stuff like that. You know, this kind of technology, you know, you can kind of take you know, you can start with that manual process if you don't, you know, if you don't have this technology today, or if it's not looking like you're going to be able to get budget for this anytime soon. You know, we did this for probably a year or two before we had the you know, the technology to scale it, but that allowed us to get all of the processes in place beforehand. So it was kind of a really cool thing. But, kind of speaking about the technology itself, one of the things when we think about the, message, and when we think about rolling out new products, we roll out slides, and we've got our talk tracks, and we usually, create a video with it, and we get feedback from a couple key sellers, roll it out to the broader team, we might certify on it. And then we look, and traditionally we've always kind of looked at what were the analytics, like, if folks are sharing brochures or sharing slides with prospects, and we can, see how are they engaging. We can see which sellers are which sellers are clicking on stuff, or how often are, our internal team clicking on things and viewing, content that we shared. And then, what percentage of them from there are really turning in and actually sharing it out with prospects. And that's really great. And then from there, what percentage of the prospects are actually clicking on it? So it's a nice, and then of course, then how does that relate to business value, right? What, are there particular pieces of content or messages that, or, slides that are presentations that are being utilized and to more success than others? What we ran into, though, is that a lot of times sellers will be, we will train them on a message, we'll roll it out, and we've got the content, but a lot of times they'll take it, and they might not even use slides, and they might just articulate the message in face-to-face selling, or over video conference, right? So much more of the buying process now happening over video conference. And so then we kind of didn't really have a real great view into the whole picture of like how the actual message is working, right? Because there's so many instances where sellers are articulating value, articulating these messages that we train them on and we roll out to them, but not using any content. So then how do you do that? And this is where, thinking more broadly about messaging intelligence, and starting to take advantage of the fact that so much more of this, the buying process and the sales process happening over video conference, where you can now capture recording and actually start to see who's using what, what messages are folks relying on, how are, if we can go in and scan like 5 or 6 different calls pretty quickly and just jump right to the point where they, after the pleasantries at the beginning, okay, right, here's where they articulated, the new message, and maybe they used the slides, maybe they didn't, and so that allows you to start to really be able to kind of start to gauge what messages are working, even, above and beyond, outside of just the, what content is being used. And so, Mary, can you kind of speak to this a little bit? We've done a lot of cool stuff here around
because I think
evolving.
Yeah, so I think that there are people on this. I'm looking at comments from people on the call, which are fantastic. They're collaborating and talking about things. So I think what you have on the screen here is probably the variety of ways that people are trying to do what you're describing today, is finding those nuggets, and how do I figure out, are they using the right messaging? What's the response from customers, et cetera? So the hardest way, the most manually intensive way, is going to be, not manual intensive, the most time intensive, is to listen to live calls, like get on live calls with reps, or to listen to lots and lots of sales recordings, right? That's the most time intensive, and most time intensive for both sales enablement or product marketing or sales management, right? The second way is, it's still hard. It's still there's some manual effort to it, but it requires a certain culture in your group. So some of you might ask sales to share something about what's working or what's not. Hey, you've had this new messaging for 3 weeks now. How did it go? Whatever. Some of you may get some good feedback. Some of you may hear nothing. Sometimes you have to go pick your favorite 3 people who will respond to you, right? We were talking about that earlier, right, Michael? But how are you going to get that? Maybe you have a committee that you use. That's still a hard process, because you have to get people to remember what they did it work, et cetera. The easiest way is if you can leverage technology to do this. And what I would say is, if you start to think about doing more with less as the economy is changing, or maybe you're not hiring as many, or you have a smaller enablement team, or managers are managing more people, you can start to look at this and say, okay, I can start to think about how do I build a business case for this? And we may even do a future webinar on this topic. But using technology is, we've used that in many things, whether it's CRM or sales enablement or conversation intelligence, is how leveraging that to, instead of listening to every call, how can you automate that at scale? First, obviously recording calls, but then having analytics and using AI on those calls so that you surface the calls that you're looking for without having to go look for them. That's nirvana, right? That's the goal, the ideal situation, that information comes to you. So key phrases or product names or competitors or whatever it is that you're looking for, you can have the system proactively sending that to you, or you can do searches on it to find what you need, or you can look at a subset of the team. I just want to look at my SDRs in mid-market. Right? So having a technology that can support that, as well as a couple other things, is if the technology can also proactively help give coaching to people based on what's happening on that call. So I found I had the tech was telling me, conversation intelligence was telling me, the SDRs, when I hear them talk about this particular competitor, they're not really getting it. They're not really having a good conversation. They don't really know how to do that. So then I address that through some training, but then they forget. So now anytime they mention that particular item on a call, the system automatically pushes them a short video with some links to, hey, remember, these are the resources. Here's that video of the role play that I did with the manager from the team to remind you, how do you overcome this objection, or how do you talk about how are we different than this other competitor? So that takes so much pressure off of me and the managers of having to coach every call. So that's another way. And then Jake wants to know, product marketing wants to know, oh, well, where are all the calls where people are talking about this new, let's say, sales content management? Talk about that now. Okay, so now Jake, I don't have to go get that for Jake. Jake can get that himself. And then something that just came out today, which I'm just starting to use, I'm so excited about, is something we call show reels. And Jake, why don't you just talk about how you're going to use that? Like this is like magical in my mind.
Yeah, it brought a tear to my eye when I saw this. It's basically the ability. So we've already had it set up in Slack, so where like we'll get notifications on the marketing team of like, hey, XYZ competitor was mentioned in this call, and you can jump in and click in if you want to listen. Or particular products that we're rolling out that are new. Hey, this was mentioned, and you can jump in and listen. Now we've got the ability where you can type in a search for a particular competitor or a particular product or an objection or a topic, and the system will mine all of the recent calls, and it'll stitch together really a highlight reel of several different salespeople and different examples of from a real call. And so it allows you to sort of get that quick pulse on multiple, instead of having to jump in and listen to or proactively go and try to find, now you can get that kind of that highlight reel kind of stitched together, which is cool. It's powerful.
I saw an interesting comment in the chat as well. Sometimes people have the tool, but it's not always utilized as well as it can be. And I'm not sure what Julie meant by that, but I know in our prep for this call, we had that conversation about reps who maybe aren't quite as on board with, clicking the record button and using those types of tools. And we've kind of talked about some of the value of this, but how do you kind of share that with your sales team? What's in it for them at the end of the day? What's the with them for them?
That's a great, Mary. I think I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, sorry, Michael, for any area in particular. I think Julie's question was related to underutilizing Gong, which is another tool that analyzes recordings. So Julie, maybe we could talk offline about, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, and I was thinking, Mary, as well, just as far as like, are there any people in the sales force who maybe don't see the value in that sort of thing, and we kind of have to share that value with them and help them understand?
Yeah, I think for any tool, right? Any tool they're using is to show what's the benefit going to be, how, and today I think a lot of it is about time. How is it going to help make people more efficient, right? So instead of listening to every call, oh, now I can see the show reel of, and it's the 30 seconds of that call that I want to see, right? I don't have to listen to the whole call. And I think that's why any tool, there's reluctance, is it's too hard or it takes too much time. Mm-hmm. And time seems to be I don't know about other people, but I know for our team, for myself, time is the most precious thing these days. And anything that can help people be more efficient. So getting your champions within your organization, starting with a few people and figuring out like what's really going to work here and helping promote that, like Jake's sake, right? Promote things, helping promote that to the rest of the team and say, this manager used the tool for coaching and he used to spend 2 hours to do this, but now he could do this in 15 minutes. Or she used to only spend X% of her time, the manager spent X% of her time on coaching, but now she's doing it asynchronously and now she can listen to calls and get through them quickly and just focus in on things she needs. And so now, and here's what outcome has happened. Now here's a great call from that seller she coached after hearing that call. Now listen to how much better they are. Right, so stringing that together. And I know for people on this call, you may not have this technology today and it's kind of a future thing, but starting to look at this current slide, hardest, hard, easiest, where are you on this scale and how can you work with your organization to say, you know what, we want to get better at this and here's what the benefit's going to be. Any kind of coaching, marketing, hearing from the customer's point of view, those are critical to helping teams improve. I think everybody knows coaching from a sales management perspective is hard to find time to do. And if you have a way to do it that's going to help you save time and have more coaching done, the better off your team's going to be.
Great questions, everybody. So this last piece we'll kind of go through here, and then we'll get to our takeaways. Being able to leverage conversation data, and sharing examples from, making examples from peers. Salespeople want to hear from other successful salespeople. They want to see how other people, they talk shop. They, if there's a particular objection that they're getting, and they hear one person's got a really nice, because it can be just a couple words difference that you use or the way you phrase something that makes, a statement that you make to a prospect sound confrontational versus sounding like you're edging them into the, into a good direction. So it's, giving them access to one another's calls, and being able to, grab those highlight reels and, put them into playbooks and things like that. It's really, it really helps. It can be really powerful. Marketers getting that front row seat, so often in marketing, we feel like the kid who we're kind of, stuck inside, like watching everybody play outside in the game. Salespeople are talking to the prospects, and the customer, success and the services team, they're talking to the to the customers, and marketing, we feel like we're everything is secondhand a lot of times. So having the ability to kind of get that front row seat without having to bug the sales team, hey, can I come and shadow your call? That's really, really important. And then driving that kind of the message consistency. Obviously sales enablement has such an important role to play. It's, sales enablement is kind of the key driver of that. Any other kind of points that you'd make on here, Mary?
No, because we only have 2 minutes left. There's been so much on the chat, so I'm responding to some of those.
Okay, great. All right, awesome. So we'll get to the key takeaways. So being the bridge, being the, making, sales enablement is uniquely positioned to be that that connective tissue between the different functions in the revenue team. And so think in those terms, think about how you can, be that glue where, it may be a small thing to you, but like it's, it could be hugely valuable to somebody in marketing who doesn't have that pulse on the sales team in the way you do, and vice versa. Owning that feedback loop, really taking, and kind of recognizing your role as being able to make the marketers' content and messaging and everything that they do more effective, and help, by getting that feedback from the sales team, guiding the content, making sure that it's organized in the right way, making sure the sellers are aware of it, that it's contextualized, that there's a good feedback loop, that you've got a way of your, key internal subject matter experts and voice, key opinion leaders to kind of, that the sales team can hear them, and then guiding that messaging and kind of using that call data. So those are the kind of the key takeaways here. But I'd love to kind of, we've got just a minute left, jump to any of the questions here, if we maybe want to take just one more.
Oh my goodness, there are so many. So many. It's more comments than questions. The team is so collaborative. One of the things I noticed, somebody was talking about newsletters, and there was a lot of conversation about that. And somebody said, oh yeah, I should incorporate video. I would encourage you to think about using video more. That is the way that we consume information, learn information in our daily lives. And that is what sellers are used to. And that is what we try to provide them, short, bite-sized video content, as opposed to a lot of reading. That's been our experience. That's my experience. And I think people will follow that. But if you have stuff that's working for you today and you're getting great feedback, keep going with that. But again, think about short bite-sized videos that people can consume for information.
That's great. All
Excellent.
right.
Well, I see we are right at the top of the hour. So perfect timing, Jake and Mary. You nailed that. And we're just thank you again for sharing all your insights today. It's been a good conversation in the chat, a good conversation about that topic, about bringing those two organizations together. We look forward to seeing everybody on our next webinar. I'm not sure the exact date quite yet, but hopefully in the next few weeks, you'll see that go out. So we're looking forward to having you on that. Thank you for joining today. Thank you for all the great chat and all the great input and questions. And we will see you in hopefully not too long. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.